on our webinar here. I have with me Riley Hawkins, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about the product itself when we go through the demo section. Sarah, if you could turn over control through Zoom so I can click the screen, then I can get started. Great, thank you. What I wanted to do first was introduce myself, a little background about me. I'm a lawyer by training, and I'm the Director of Business Development here at Evisort. And what you're seeing on the screen here, a little bit background about us as a company. We're a company founded out of Harvard Law and MIT, and our technology can automatically extract insights from contracts. So that's things like clauses, key dates. We work with a wide range of companies. And if you could all just bear with me for a second here. It looks like I don't have control of the screen. So if you'll just bear with me for a second.
By the way, Alex and I did not coordinate wearing both plaid today, as that was just a nice coincidence. But super excited to have everyone. In the meantime, I can introduce myself as well. Actually, Alex and I are both lawyers by background. Alex has the opportunity to work a lot with our clients. I get the opportunity to do that as well, but also with our engineering team. So as the VP of Solutions, get to kind of take that legal knowledge and work with our engineers to develop new features. So super excited to kind of detail everything that Evisort can do, how our clients are using it, and answer any questions. So definitely looking forward to the Q&A section. I would encourage everyone to utilize that in the bottom, on the bottom of the screen, there's a little Q&A button. Click that and open it up, and feel free to log any questions. We can try to respond real time, or we'll save some of those for the end too, and make sure that we get all those answered.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. And Riley, just to check with you, you can see my screen now, right, where it says world-class tech and customers.
I can.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for bearing with us. As I mentioned, we work with a wide range of companies and enterprises. Our technology is able to automatically extract insights from contracts. And part of this, the reason why the company was created was because our founders saw that contract management had a lot of challenges, posed a lot of challenges. There's a lot of inefficiency for folks on the line who work with legal teams. If you've used contract management before, you probably know that it's hard to make sure everyone's loading in all of their contracts into the system. And it can be challenging to get that visibility because you don't know what contracts are out there. And it can be especially challenging if you need to find out what contracts hold what legal risks or commercial risks. For example, if you accidentally auto-renew on a vendor contract, that's an area that you'll want to be watching out for, especially in these more lean times. And so it's not just a technological challenge, it's also an organizational challenge. So for folks who work in larger companies, you may see this out on a daily basis, but you've got silos, whether it's by department or group. Maybe each department has their own way of storing contracts, and you're not getting that visibility into what's inside of maybe the finance department's contracts. If you're in procurement, you might see a large number of them, but you might not see maybe this other department's contracts. And so companies have these silos, and where Evisort really helps, and Riley will dive into this in the product demo, is that we centralize all of that information in one place. We can connect with each repository listed here and others as well, so that even before we get to the AI component of Evisort, we know that we can actually pull in the contract information that's out there. And all it takes is one sync, and then the AI can then run through all of the contracts and then start indexing and cataloging that information so you know what's inside of your contracts. And I want to be clear here, and Riley, I'd love to hear a couple of your thoughts on this, because this was something unique to me when I first saw Evisort. I didn't realize this technology was available, which is, we're not relying on, when we're looking at contracts to catalog the information, we're not looking at templated language, or, if you want to categorize a limitation or liability clause, it's not just looking for the header. It's able to look at the language and parse through the paragraphs that follow the header to identify the information in it and say this is a limitation of liability clause. So you can do this with third-party paper. So if your contracts are, maybe you have a certain set of contracts that are on your paper, but maybe you have some contracts on other folks' paper, third parties. We can actually pick up information in it without any additional training. Riley, do you want to share a little bit about how customers and how our clients are using this particular functionality?
Yeah, definitely. I think, a lot of folks, when they hear AI, and maybe 10 years ago, if you're looking at AI solutions that could, that said that they could review documents, what you were looking at was probably a rules-based AI that would classify documents or extract information based on some really basic technology. Like if I find the word indemnification, then that's how I know it's an indemnification clause. Or if I find the word liability, then that's a limitation of liability clause. But when you get out into the real world, you have contracts of all sorts of different types. We see a huge amount of variability across customers and industries in terms of how folks write their services agreements or their NDAs. So it's super important that the AI is actually able to work on documents regardless of the way that they're written. And so, like Alex was describing, we've trained our AI on tens of millions of agreements. And so it has learned over time how to analyze documents regardless of the way that they're written and take into account all those different contextual pieces that we as lawyers have learned to look for as well, just over the course of, reviewing so many documents over the years. So how I see customers using this is that they're able to take all of their documents, all of those documents that are based off their template, and then all of those other documents, maybe they wish they didn't have to enter into, but the reality of the world is every company is involved with other organizations where they have to use their paper, third-party paper. And you can take all of those agreements and with this deeper machine learning AI that we have today in 2020, actually get insights about all of those. So I think that's super important just to get that coverage. Maybe 10 years ago wasn't possible, but today it is.
Yeah, and we're talking about it now, but Riley will show you how that works in the product demo section. And for folks, I see some folks have just joined. Welcome. If you've got questions, feel free to use the Q&A functionality in the Zoom webinar or pop a message in the chat if you can see it. But we're going to keep on continuing with our presentation of the slide deck here, and then Riley will show a product demo next, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But this slide essentially shows, our AI automatically is pre-trained, as Riley mentioned, over tens of millions of contracts. So it's very familiar with, for example, an assignment clause. We have standard clauses that are common across so many contracts. And the system is pre-trained to understand, what clauses to look for, but also knowing where to find the effective date, how to incorporate the term clause and add it to the term length and add it to the effective date to generate an expiration date. We also know all the variations of language when it comes to auto-renewing clauses. So what all that means is that, when you're doing vendor management, we can actually run across your contracts and give you information about auto-renewing contracts and when to watch out for those expiring contracts. There's a lot of information that we pick up automatically. This is just a quick overview of it. You can see there's more than this itself. It's not just provisions and key information, which we call metadata. It's not just dates, party names, and key provisions. We're also able to detect the type of contract, which can be important if you want to segregate, for example, your NDAs. You want to look at what's, what you've agreed to in the past on your NDAs, your employment contracts. I don't know where folks are from, but there's a lot of development in employment law for non-solicits and non-competes. So we can identify for you that this is an employment agreement and then jump to those particular provisions. This is particularly important for legal teams, but also other business teams. You can imagine how the use cases will vary widely if you're talking to procurement teams as well. This is the last slide that we have in the presentation, but I just wanted to touch upon it because, for folks here who are working who've worked with software before, you may realize that software deployments can take a while. Implementation can take a long time. I'm from the legal world. I didn't realize that until I joined the software world, but it actually can take 6 months to a year. That's not how Evisort works. We're pretty lean, and our technology is designed to have implementation done very quickly. So it could be from 4 days to 4 weeks. There's not a huge professional services lift. All the algorithms are pre-trained, as we mentioned. It's just a question of syncing Evisort to your repository and extracting that information. So that's a very high level overview of Evisort. We're gonna now move on to the demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Riley. But Riley is gonna actually show you how all of the things I described works. So, instead of just talking about it, he'll show it to you. So Riley, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And feel free to yourself jump in at any point. Again, for folks who are joining, there is a little chat section in the bottom right-hand corner. So feel free to drop in questions there. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A. There's also a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can click on that and drop in questions there as well. So definitely feel free to do that. We can try to respond real time, and we'll save some time at the end. But yeah, so everything that Alex described, I think, is kind of like the new age of contract management. I want to show you how that would actually work inside of Evisort. If you are a general counsel or you're part of a legal department, then I'm sure you know how many agreements today are usually stored as PDF documents. And what we did was we took, 20 years ago, we had actual physical files and file cabinets, and then we put them either in the cloud or in other storage solutions, but still very hard to search through those documents. So one thing that Evisort does, we'll take PDF documents like this, and then we'll be able to sync with wherever you're storing those documents, pull them into Evisort and make them searchable. When you enter into Evisort, and this is what it looks like on the homepage, you will see all the folders and files across all of your different repositories. So what Alex was describing earlier is that we can sync with, if you have documents in Box or in Google Drive, if you have documents in an ERP system like Ariba or Coupa, if you have salespeople who are generating contracts in Salesforce, we can sync with all those different repositories so that Evisort is that single source of truth. So when you log in, that you're sure you're seeing all your agreements. And we can actually keep those folder structures the same. So if you like the way that those folders are structured, we can keep that, and we can actually let you basically set access controls based on that, so that only certain people see certain things.
Riley, can I ask, we actually have a question from the audience here. What type of systems does Evisort integrate with? And, I know that it says here, I see Box, Google Drive, Salesforce. What systems do we integrate with?
We integrate with virtually any system that you may have contracts stored in. But it's a great question because I see so many different things out there, and everyone does it a little bit differently. So I was talking to a customer earlier today. They have all their documents stored on a local drive. That works too. So we can sync with local drives. We can sync with kind of basic cloud solutions like SharePoint and Google Drive and Box, and then more complex SaaS solutions like ERP systems and CRM systems. So it really doesn't matter. I think the point is that you can have everything in one place without disturbing the way that other folks are doing what they're doing. So if you're in the legal department and you have folks in procurement who are using Google Drive, then they can continue to save documents there. But you as a legal team can use Evisort to view everything. So hopefully
I think it's really helpful. I know from speaking to customers, there's a lot of questions about keeping contracts on shared drives. We can cover more of that in depth during the Q&A, since it seems like there's some interest here. I just wanted to make sure, maybe we can do some of these Q&As ongoing, but Riley, didn't want to throw you off here.
Yeah, no problem. I'll show what happens. So if you can imagine, documents are syncing into Evisort. What we will do at an individual document level is a couple different things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that PDF document that I showed earlier. You'll have that in our platform. We're going to convert it into a searchable version. So this is really key because what it allows you to do is then go and start searching for keywords and phrases in this document. So all of your documents, PDFs, image files will all be searchable. The technology that we're using is OCR technology. Some may be familiar, some may not, but it's basically translating those images and turning them into searchable text. What that allows our AI to do is then read through this agreement the same way that a lawyer or a paralegal would, and start looking for key information. This is the kind of information that you may already be recording manually in a system or an Excel spreadsheet. It's things like, what is the title of the agreement? When does it become effective? Who are the parties? The AI is going to identify that by reading the document, and then it's going to populate these metadata fields for you here on the right-hand side. So everything from what type of contract is it, to who are we contracting with? Is it signed or not? We can identify signature objects inside of agreements, and so that you know which of your documents are signed and which of them are maybe draft agreements. We can, for each document, say what laws is it governed by, when does it become effective, what's the term, when does it expire. A lot of renewal information. So like Alex was mentioning before, we have a lot of clients who will end up paying a lot more than they should for vendor agreements where they just didn't know that the renewal date was coming up. And so they didn't get that notice in time. What we can do is actually tell you when that renewal notice date is so that you never miss one of those dates again. Other things we pull out are liability information, provision information. So going beyond just those metadata fields, but also being able to tell you, hey, this is where the assignment clause shows up in this agreement. So if I click on this view button, I can see, where's the governing law, where's the indemnification. So especially for those really long agreements, we're able to just take you right to the part of the contract where you care about. But the bottom line here is that this is the kind of thing that a lot of folks do manually today. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not necessarily accurate. So I think we have a statistic that when this is done manually, accuracy is about 60%. But Evisort actually doesn't release algorithms unless they're at least 95% accurate. So we can increase the accuracy and also totally remove the need for manual entry while still allowing you to interact with the document, make edits as you need to. We'll show you where we pulled data from. One question I get a lot is, how can I get to 100% accuracy? And so what we can do is we can actually allow you to interact with the document, see where the AI pulled data, and make corrections as you need to, so that you do get to that level of 100% accuracy.
Riley, so, I've noticed, I think we've seen a lot of dates that are pulled out. How does the system know where to look for the dates? Is it looking for one specific area, or is it looking for a specific format? Can you share how Evisort is able to find the dates and some of this other information that you see on the right here?
Yeah, that's another question we get a lot of. It's gonna, regardless of the data point, whether it's a party name or an expiration date, the AI is going to look in a couple different places inside of the document, because it's learned over time that sometimes, for example, the parties are always listed in the preamble, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're on the signature block, sometimes they're buried in a different part of the agreement. So it's going to look in a lot of different places, and it's going to use context clues that is picked up as it's learned to identify this different information. And sometimes it'll even do calculations for you. So a lot of times you won't see an expiration date stated explicitly in a document, but you will have an effective date and you will have a term. And so what we can do from that point is take the effective date and the term and then calculate that expiration date for you.
That's really interesting. I think, once you have the dates in there, if you needed to adjust it, how do you do that?
Yeah, so let's say you have an expiration date in here, but you want to change it. You can click this little pencil, and then a little picker will pop up, and you can change the expiration date yourself. So you can bump it out, let's say to February of 2021. There's also some automation that Evisort has baked in. So if you have an automatically renewing contract like this one, we'll actually take care of that, extending that term for you when we get to the expiration date, and bump it out if it's an automatically renewing contract, and we'll use the renewal term to make sure that we get that right.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll share with the group here, one of our clients initially used Evisort to track these dates, and they wanted to make sure that they weren't auto renewing on contracts from their vendors. But because they were able to get expiration dates so accurately, they started using this for another use case, which was to track their own client agreements. They were a managed IT services shop. And so they knew that the ability to track the dates would enable them to get ahead of expirations or know when to re-engage the client. So there's a lot of use cases that you can develop out of understanding when the dates are. And that goes towards getting visibility into your contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. When you have the data, there's so much that you can do with it. And I think that's a nice transition over to Evisort's search and reporting dashboard, which all of our clients use a little bit differently because they have different use cases. But they have access now to those 40 different data points that Evisort pulls out of the box across all of their agreements. So before, maybe it was clicking through folders and files to find the agreements that we've entered into with a certain counterparty. But because Evisort's pulling that data out for every contract, we can use this dashboard to go in and apply filters. So if I click on counterparties here on the left-hand side, I can say, I want to see all the documents that I've ever entered into with a specific counterparty. And this will search across all my different repositories, all my different folders. And if I click run search, will return a list for me of all the documents we've ever entered into with Vending R Us. So the master agreement, any statements of work, any amendments that we've ever agreed to. So the use case here is, I just don't know where I left something. And I've seen when folks enter an organization for the first time and there's a lot of tribal knowledge around where things are stored, this can be a super powerful tool. I've also seen companies that are really active with M&A, who are acquiring the business of other corporations and inheriting contracts. Can be really hard to find where things are. A lot of times it's just we have documents stored in a lot of different places. So rather than having to email my friend over in procurement to see if they have a copy of the contract, they can just run a search here and in a couple of seconds get the full universe of everything we've agreed to with a specific party.
So Riley, this looks like it's a pretty robust reporting functionality. I think that it bears sharing to that this reporting is different than the alerting. There's a separate function for the alerting. Riley, we have a question here from someone in the audience, Kimberly, about can you actually talk a little bit about the alert functionality? For example, I think there's probably this question among lots of folks in the audience. If you've got contracts that are coming up for renewal, how do you set up the alerts and how do you actually run the reports if you want to go in deeper? So just knowing ahead of time which contracts are renewing or expiring. How do you do that?
Yeah, no, great question. I'm glad that somebody asked that. So a couple different ways that we can address that, right? So one is we have this search and reporting dashboard where I can go in and I can say, hey, I want to see everything that's coming up for expiration in the next 120 days. But I can also take that a step further and say, I don't want to just see the contracts coming up for expiration in the next 120 days, that all of them. I want to see the ones that automatically renew. And so I can actually mix and match these filters and combine them and say, on top of just those contracts coming up for expiration, I want to see the ones that are at risk of renewing if we don't do something, and then run that search. And that's going to give me a list of, hey, here are the 5 documents, maybe over the next 4 months that are coming up for expiration. And I should take some kind of action on these, or I'll risk missing that notice date. Maybe I'll be locked into a subsequent term. So you always have the ability to do that kind of ad hoc whenever you want to. But where we're going to take that and create some automation around it is using Evisort's alerting function, which lets you tie an alert to any of those different metadata fields or searches that you can run in the analyzer and get email notifications every so often when certain things happen. So I could create an alert that says, expiring contracts with auto renewal. I'll put a description in here. This will be the message that comes into my inbox. So it could be something like, hey, these are the contracts coming up for auto renewal, please address. I could set a frequency here. So I want to get this alert every week or every month. And then I would just create that same filter structure that I did on the analyzer page. I want to see contracts coming up for auto renewal, only those that have an expiration date in the next 120 days. And then this is going to be a report that comes to my email if I want it to come to me, or it can go to a department, so I can make sure that this goes to finance or procurement. And that's going to give me a list of all those contracts that are coming up for renewal, so that there's no chance that I could possibly miss one of those renewal notice dates. In that email, there'll be links where you take you back to the platform, so you can start kind of drilling deeper and taking actions on any of those things.
Yeah, I think this can be pretty helpful. I think there's another question I think you've answered about whether these notifications go to your email. Another question that's come up also from Kimberly is, how does this function of setting up alerts, how does that interact with the AI? So does the AI trigger things automatically is the question? Or how does AI work with this alerting function to provide legal and procurement teams, for example, the ability to get insight into what's coming up due and expiring and auto-renewing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kimberly. So the good news is that Evisort is going to go across all of your agreements, existing agreements, and any of those that you're entering into on an incremental basis. And it's going to identify all this information for you. So you don't have to worry about identifying, what's the renewal notice date? Is there a clause that's maybe loaded in and it has like uncapped liability, for example? That's where the AI is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then you decide what you want, what is important to you, and what you want to get notified about. So we gave the example of, hey, I want to get an email every week of contracts coming up for expiration. But because Evisort tracks clauses and other information too, we could set up an alert that says, hey, show me all the clauses that come into Evisort or come into our S drive, our local drive, or our box folder that have a limitation of liability clause where there's uncapped liability mentioned. Or a governing law clause where it mentions Ohio law. We never enter into contracts with Ohio law. So we want to get more visibility into that. So the system is going to give you access to a ton of data. And the platform is meant to allow you either through alerts or reports to decide what you want to look at and when.
Yeah, and this is something I've also heard from a lot of clients, and I'll highlight it again. And this may be repetitive, but the power of combining the integrations with the AI and then with the alerts is pretty robust. So, for example, if you're a business, which some businesses care a lot about, perhaps agreeing with vendors to not cap a liability. So one thing that legal teams are often looking at is, are we agreeing to unlimited liability? So what you can do is you can set up a search and alert that says, notify me anytime a contract is missing a limitations of liability clause, which means that you're agreeing to unlimited liability. And then because the integration syncs every, I believe, 15 minutes or so, what it's going to do is anytime someone from another department saves a contract to their shared drive or to their box, it'll populate over through Evisort. The fact that a LOL is missing, a limitation of liability clause missing, is going to be detected, and then an alert will be populated over and sent to the legal team once a day, once a week, so that you're constantly up to date on what contracts are creating risk. And I think that's something that isn't intuitive, but when you combine the integrations with the AI and the alerting, that's the functionality you'll get. Riley, how are legal teams at some of the largest clients that we work with, how are they using the integrations in combination with the alerting?
Yeah, no, you started to touch on it a little bit, but the integrations are going to allow you to make sure that you have a total 360 view of every contract that exists as part of your organization. So the integrations help you define a really broad universe. And then the AI helps you learn more about those documents without having to go through and read each one of them yourself. So what I see for really large organizations is they have a big tech stack. They have documents saved in different places. And this is true even for some smaller organizations too. Just because as you grow, documents are saved in different places. And so that's where the integrations in Evisort basically can just sit as a layer on top of all of those. And then one way I've also helped visualize what the AI is doing is basically generating a cover sheet for every single agreement. So all that information that you wish you knew about every document, it's going to generate that for you. And then that is the basis for the searching and reporting and alerting that you do. So every search and report, because of the integrations, you know it's on all of your documents. And then you have all these different levers to pull. And we gave a couple of examples: expiration dates, limit of liability, but the sky is really the limit. I've seen clients a lot recently use this tool to track force majeure clauses in the midst of the coronavirus situation. So they can actually go in to their clause library here and say, I want to see all the documents that I have that contain force majeure language. And then they can even go deeper and say, I want to see all the documents that have force majeure language where any of these words are mentioned. And the hot ones right now, right, are pandemic, epidemic, quarantine. So I can get really granular, and I'm helping a lot of clients with this right now to just get visibility across what are the documents where we may have some recourse to suspend the contract or suspend payment. It empowers the lawyers to do what they actually are trained to do, which is do that legal analysis without having to build that Excel spreadsheet that every junior associate has had to build, where they look at contracts, they copy and paste the text, they put it into a spreadsheet. This does that for you. The view that I'm showing now is we can actually show you the force majeure clause or any other clause in the agreement, how it shows up. And I can see for some of these that pandemic is mentioned. So this is a great starting point for me as I'm doing a one-off due diligence project, or maybe even something more regular. And can we take this outside of the platform? So one thing that I think is super helpful is that you can take the data that you have in Evisort and open that up into an Excel spreadsheet that has all the data about the documents that I searched for. So what you'll see here is I did a search for all my contracts that contain force majeure. I got back some results. This spreadsheet is going to tell me, who are we contracting with? What contract types? Do we have services agreements, NDAs, integration agreements that have force majeure language? What's the effective date, expiration date, contract value? And then on this other tab, all of those clauses and the text actually abstracted. So this is, back to that point of something that lawyers are building manually today. Nobody wants to do that, but they have to do it because it's necessary. This removes that part of the process. And then you can take this spreadsheet, you can send it around to your executive team and other folks that you're cooperating with, depending on what you're working on.
And Riley, I'll also interject here because, one of the challenges that we hear from especially GCs and legal teams, sometimes also from other teams, but especially with legal teams, is historically, the legal department has been a roadblock, the person who's an obstacle for business teams. And so, we've seen that the highest performing legal teams are proactive with how they help out their business partners at other parts of the company. The question comes up, how do I do that? In the past, maybe the CEO or someone, a business unit leader will say, hey, tell me all of my, what can I do? Am I still on the hook for this contract, even if there's a force majeure clause? So legal has been sort of this department that says, here's where all the risks are, here's what you can do. But with a tool like Evisort, it transforms the position of legal, because now what you can do is, instead of just providing that answer, you don't need them to ask you the question. You can run the report and say, hey, CEO, here are 5 different contracts where we have obligations that we can actually get out of because we have a force majeure clause that covers pandemics. And so that kind of proactive approach can really empower legal teams. Another example is, if right now you're looking to cut spend, you can run a report and say, show me all of my contracts that have termination for convenience. And then you can also assess, these are the contracts we can get out of termination for convenience. Here's the contract value. And you can bring this to your CEO or your COO and say, we can actually save this much money for these vendors. We are actually, although we're still on the hook and they haven't expired, we can actually get out of it earlier. So these are ways that I think some of the more forward-looking legal departments are using tools like Evisort to really drive the impact of the legal team as a whole. We're seeing this both in the upper end of the market, the Fortune 500s, but also for smaller companies where you might be the only lawyer. It's probably even more important there because you don't have a team that can help you find these things. That's where technology is really enabling legal teams to be more proactive.
Yeah, that's awesome, Alex. I think there's some features here that AI today, I think, is going to provide some revenue neutral benefits, like in terms of efficiency. It makes the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis just a lot easier. You don't have to do things as manually as maybe you used to. But then to your point, a lot of revenue positive things as well, where legal can actually change from maybe being a cost center to an empowered business unit that can actually come to their company with a lot of really important insights about what we're obligated to, what we're spending on, whether it's coronavirus situation and figuring out, how do we want to do vendor management in a time that's maybe a little bit more difficult, or things like how much time does it take us to review an NDA on average? That's where a lot of Evisort's pre-signature capabilities are going to help speed things up from a sales perspective as well. So a lot of different ways where legal can kind of shift and become a really revenue generating part of the company.
For sure, for sure. I know, Riley, you have some more to cover on the product demo, but I just wanted to encourage folks, we have a couple of outstanding questions, but if you haven't already, we'd like this this product demo and this webinar to address the challenges you're facing. So please feel free to submit a question, anything you want to share, any challenges that you're running through that this technology may be able to solve. We can show you a targeted part of the platform or features that help address that problem, since you're probably not the only one who's dealing with it. But Riley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I'll keep the rest of this pretty quick because I think, I'm really excited to hear kind of folks' feedback, and if there are specific questions we can answer, definitely want to do that. Evisort has other tools in here that are going to be helpful. Again, you have all this data, so what do we want to do with it? Well, we want to give it to you in a way that's really easy to visualize. This is a dashboard that helps you visualize the expiring contracts data. I can see over the next 12 months what contracts are coming up for expiration, which subset of those automatically renew. And then Evisort also, has a pre-signature module that you can actually use to generate contracts, get them approved more quickly, signed, and then archived into your system. And I think that's one thing where out on the market today, it's very difficult to find one solution that can take you from the moment you need a contract created all the way to the day that it expires. And folks feel like they have to piece together different solutions. So having one solution where you can have folks submit contract requests, where they can fill out intake forms, maybe this is happening manually via email today, and then that can kick off an approval process where we're setting different stages of approval. Finance has to approve first, legal has to review, bringing that to signature. And Evisort's pre-signature tool has e-signature integration, and then all the way to the finalize and archive. So the documents that you're generating through Evisort can then become part of your repository and be a part of the corpus of documents that you are searching and reporting and gaining visibility on. So from a product perspective, actually, Alex, that is all that I want to cover, because I want to turn it over at this point to folks who have questions, and we can stay in the product to maybe answer some of those, but definitely want to hear folks' thoughts.
Yeah. Let's go back to the top here. I have an early question about the integrations that we still haven't addressed. So this question comes from Leonie. The question is, how does Evisort know only to grab contracts and not all documents from, say, a shared drive or a Box location? So it sounds like the question is, how does Evisort know which places to grab contracts from?
Yeah, it's a great, I get this question, every other day. And I think it's important. It's one that we can help with, actually. So if you know where we want to pull contracts from, great, right? If we know that there are these 5 folders where we're typically storing contracts, or these couple different repositories, then we'll start pulling from those on day 1. What we can do on day 2 is, since Evisort can classify contracts, it can tell you whether or not something is a contract, or as opposed to maybe an email or it's a picture of your cat. We can make that differentiation. And then we can also tell you things like which of your contracts are still active. So we can actually help with the cleanup that usually happens manually over time, or not at all when you're transitioning to a new system, because the AI is actually able to give a lot of insights into what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that a lot of legal departments are dealing with, especially if you're looking at contracts from someone else's folder, because it's not quite as organized. So just to follow up on that, what happens if you're an organized team that already has subfolders set up? Do I need to recreate those subfolder structures when I integrate with those shared drives?
Yeah, another really good question. We don't want to totally get rid of folders. I mean, with the AI and with the search and reporting, you're able to go beyond those structures in the ways that they are limited. So it's really easy to quickly find that one contract that you're looking for, or report across all folders. But sometimes folders are still very valuable. So we don't want to just flatten everything for you. We'll actually preserve the folder structure that you had in any of those repositories. So if you have some folders and subfolders set up in your SharePoint, we'll keep those the way that they are. So you can have your SharePoint here, you can have subfolders, so you can have your NDAs folder, your one with services agreements. If you do it by clients, everybody does it a little bit differently. And you can even set access controls on the folder level. So I can go in and say, hey, this SharePoint folder is really just for legal. So I only want my legal department to have access here. I don't want the finance team, the procurement team, the sales team, they don't need access. So even though we're pulling documents from different locations, pulling in different folders, we can give access to the entire company if we want to. Usually it's more of, some select folks on procurement, finance, sales, maybe HR, but then only give them access to what they really need.
Yeah, I think the access settings is critical. And, one thing that Riley touched upon earlier is that when you control access settings, you can also control who gets what alerts. Like, so if there are updates to specific types of contracts, it doesn't have to go out to everybody. You can say this goes to this group or this person and not that person or not that group. But related to alerts, we have a question, Riley, about commonly used alerts. Does Evisort offer top 10 frequently used alerts to pre-populate setup, or does the user have to come up with the alerts themselves?
Yeah, awesome question. So whether it's alerts, whether it's setting up your pre-signature approvals, getting started with the analyzer, Evisort has just a ton of materials that our implementation team, which is actually mostly made up of lawyers, will use to help your team get up and going so that day one you already have value. And in the process, do a lot of teaching in terms of what is possible inside of the platform so that you have the ability to do that going forward on your own. In terms of alerts, what we see a lot of is definitely around those key dates. So expiration dates, renewal notice dates, those are super common. Maybe that's probably the most common. Other things that I see is documents that are uploaded recently that are missing certain language or have certain risky or problematic language. So we talked a lot about, we give some examples, but like limitation of liability that's uncapped, termination that's for convenience, governing law that's in a certain state, things like that. The other thing that I see a lot of is setting up review workflows. So in the platform, you can actually create as many custom fields as you want. And one thing that we see our customers use this for is to actually triage work across their team. So they can set up some fields that actually track review status so that legal can review documents, finance can review can be assigned to a specific person. And then you as the administrator or the person in charge of your department, maybe your legal operations, maybe your general counsel, can see what other people are doing. And when they finish review of a set of documents, you can get an alert. So those are maybe my top three. I don't know if there's any others that you would add to that, Alex.
There's not, and I think that just shows there's a diversity of needs from different legal departments. The only thing I would add is that that's part of our implementation process. I don't know if folks saw how quickly Riley built that alert on the demo, but we have a team that will help you get up to speed on syncing Evisort with all of your contracts. That's an automated process, and then the process to build these alerts is fairly quickly. We'll walk you through it and make sure it's set up. And once it's set up once, it can keep running. If you want to set up additional ones, we're available, but I think it's actually a fairly straightforward process. So I think it's good to go to the next question now, Riley, which is, let me see here. Do contracts need to have structure with headers in order for the AI to interpret clauses like ownership, licensing, or can it be interpreted without that type of structure with the headers, without the headers?
Great question. I'm going to go back and do the search that I did earlier for force majeure to just illustrate this. With all of our data points, we're never just looking at one thing. So the header can be a nice indication that something is, a certain type of clause. For example, force majeure. A lot of times it just says, subsection 2.a force majeure. A lot of times it doesn't. And that goes for a lot of different clauses. There's so much variability across provisions. So we take into account a lot of different things. The AI is actually going in and understanding the meaning of the words and the sentences in the provision in order to make the determination that, yes, this is a force majeure clause. So you'll see that some of these say force majeure and it's really clear. And then other of these may not. So if I scroll down, I'll see that these are written different ways. If this was just a discrete sentence of the agreement, then we'd be able to pull that out as well. So it's really important that the AI doesn't rely on headers or any given keyword or phrase to find that language.
Yeah, and I'll also add that I've seen instances where you may have a termination language littered throughout the contract. It's not just going to find a section called termination and highlight it. That's very simple. What it'll do is it'll actually look through the entire contract, and there may be a sentence in some other section with a different header label that touches upon termination. That part's going to be highlighted. So you can see, if you can see some of these, like force majeure on that first one is located in three different parts of the contract. So it's not just looking for the headers, it's looking for the context and the language contained after the header language.
Yeah, here's an example of one where it's actually just one sentence in the agreement. So this may be buried even in the general provisions section where it's listing a lot of different, T's and C's or reps and warranties. This one doesn't even say force majeure, but it's clearly talking about that concept because it's talking about delay or failure in performance because of a fire or a flood or a power failure or a natural disaster. So that's where, going back to our previous point about the way the AI has evolved over time, is that it's no longer rules-based because a rules-based AI would break as soon as it saw a contract that it hadn't seen before, where things were written a little bit differently. That's how deeper machine learning is different.
Got it. Switching gears a little bit, there's a question here. When I have a signed contract or executed agreement completed via DocuSign, and I guess I'll broaden this out to other e-signature tools as well, can I sync it, or is there compatibility with Evisort?
The answer very simply is yes. So you can have documents that are executed through DocuSign, have those agreements come immediately into Evisort. Is one of our many integrations that we have.
Yeah, and being able to, we can also pull in contracts from email, which is you can have a contracts at yourcompanydomain.com, and so anytime that that email address is CC'd or BCC'd, it's going to automatically populate the contract into a very specific folder that you designate that Riley's pointing out here.
Yeah, so let's say you're negotiating with a third party, you get to that final signed agreement, or somebody from procurement or sales sends you an agreement that's completed. Rather than having to take that, download it from your email, and then upload it into Evisort, you can BCC this email address, and then you can have a designated location where you send all the documents that come in from your email, and they can go to one called maybe under review, and then you can go ahead and route those wherever is appropriate. So just removes that step and makes it really seamless to get documents to the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next question. So we were talking about integrations and integrations with something like SharePoint. How does that really work? Do the documents stay in SharePoint and are copied to Evisort? And can the contract that's a draft be edited in Evisort, or does the Evisort link open the file stored in SharePoint?
Another great question. I will just actually jump back very quickly to show this slide one more time. Go back. So what's happening when we're syncing with SharePoint, but this applies to other cloud solutions as well, is that as you save documents into SharePoint, they're going to automatically come into Evisort. And then what we have in Evisort is an integration with Microsoft Word, which will allow you to take the document immediately into Word, and then upload a next version for that document. And then we can have that sync be a two-way sync, so that as you update the document in Evisort, it will come back into whatever solution is your base solution, whether that's SharePoint or Google Drive or Box. That's really, I think, key for consistency. Even if Evisort is that kind of one-stop shop for contracting, that we still make sure that we're keeping SharePoint up to date with any changes that happen in Evisort.
Okay. One more question. So there's a question about DocuSign specifically, and maybe there requires some context for other attendees here. So DocuSign now has an add-on AI module. They acquired Seal Software. So, and they also have Spring CM. So the question is, what are Evisort's key advantages over DocuSign? And by DocuSign, it sounds like the question is really about Spring CM and Seal.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, and Alex, feel free to add on anything that you would also think is relevant. But one thing is just Evisort's flexibility to fit into whatever tech stack you currently have. So it's going to play really nicely with all your other solutions and actually kind of connect to them. And as you grow, be able to be that flexible solution that hooks into different solutions. We also have an API that can send data that Evisort extracts into other solutions as well. So just that flexibility, I think, is one thing. The other thing is that Evisort is an AI company at its core, at its roots. So even though we do have a platform where we allow you to do a lot of this contract management, and it really is a CLM tool, we were born as a research company that was really interested in how can we actually pull data out of documents, classify those agreements in a way that is accurate and robust. So we spent the first years of our existence just building those AI models, which is actually very, very difficult to do, and takes a lot of time and training data to get the models to a point where they are very robust. And so I think not just with DocuSign or with a company like Seal, but one of Evisort's main advantages is how robust its AI is. And when we do demos with clients, we'll actually upload their documents on the fly to show how the AI is able to work out of the box. Because I think that out of the box capability is really important, so that day one, we're getting value. And so that onboarding time takes a couple weeks as opposed to 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I think Riley hit the nail on the head here. There's two real offerings that we have. I mean, we have the AI, which we can demonstrate for you on a live demo. And I would encourage, if any of the listeners out there are curious, I would challenge you to ask other vendors to enable you to load in your contracts live on their system, just to see what the AI pulls out, because that's something we offer. And if folks want, feel free to reach out to us afterwards to set that up. We can do an NDA, and then you can upload your own your own contracts. And that's actually a question I see here. Somebody here wants to see a live demo. Reach out to myself or Riley or anybody from the Evisort team. We could set that up. We do this for all of our product demos. We actually upload your contract just to see what it picks up. And I know that I always have an interesting reaction, because I don't know for sure what it's going to pick up, but it's the best way to test it out. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking, whether it's DocuSign or some other vendor, test it out. Make sure there's nobody in the background actually logging the information manually, because that's not really AI, because that won't scale across tens of thousands of contracts. So for folks who are interested in seeing a live demo, again, reach out to us. We also might reach out to you as well, but I think it's a really interesting way to show the AI. And then to go back to the first point, I think you can't understate the importance of the integrations, because the best AI in the world isn't going to solve your problems if you don't even have access to the contract itself. If somebody has it saved in some corner of their computer, their desktop, their own personal box session, you're not going to even be able to get insight into that. So what we've done is we've combined the AI with the robust integrations, so that you don't have to worry about finding all the contracts. It's just going to come in as a matter of course. And then as a bonus, we can pull in contracts via email. So we try to automate, we try to be thoughtful and think through, where could these contracts be and how do we make it easy for them to come into the system? I think that's a big part of the differentiation we offer. And again, as I mentioned, I would encourage you to evaluate all vendors along those lines. I feel myself droning on and on. We have 1 minute left here. So I don't want to go over time here because I know that you all have busy schedules, but maybe we'll wrap it up here. I just wanted to thank you all for joining and taking your time today to spend with us to take a look at our offering. Riley or Sarah, any other last words you want to share?
Oh, that's great, Alex. Not joining on at all. I think that's all great stuff. We're happy to be a resource and a thought partner in 2020 when it comes to AI tools and how to evaluate them, because there's a lot of noise out there. But we always say that the proof is in the pudding. So like Alex said, those that can demonstrate it, I think are the ones where you can be confident that you're getting a solution that's going to work for you and scale, like you said. But yeah, and we're happy to be a resource. Feel free to reach out. I really appreciate everyone taking the time. It's been a lot of fun answering your questions.
Anything else from you, Sarah?
I just see one question about security, and I think it's just relevant to let everyone know that we were just accredited with SOC 2 Type 2 security, which is probably the highest measurement of security that a company can get. So just want to put a plug in for that.
Thanks, Sarah. I actually typed out that answer as you were talking so that the person who asked the question has that information. But yeah, that's all I've got. I know we're over time and folks are starting to trickle out. So again, thanks everyone for taking the time today. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Hopefully we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.